Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Camille Moore with Connect, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in to How to Negotiate AV Prices for Your Events with Will Curran. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping notes on the platform. You can type in your questions for Will in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen or via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'd love for this to be an interactive session, so please send in questions throughout the webinar. At the bottom of the screen, you will notice several widgets, which include one with today's handout of today's presentation. Please be sure to download that if you would like to keep for your records. A recorded version of this session will be available on demand on our websites, where you can find additional on-demand webinars for any of you needing last-minute credit hours before CMP testing. Yes, you are able to watch our sessions on demand and still receive credits. For everyone joining us live today, the CMP credit was approved for 1 credit hour for CMP IS Domain G, meeting or event design. For everyone joining us live today, we'll be sending out an email tomorrow evening with your certificate of attendance. For anyone who's watching this on demand, it will be available on demand and not live, so please email me directly at cmoreconnectmeetings.com to receive your certificate. I'll share more information about our upcoming webinars at the end of this program, but let's go ahead and get started. On your screen right now, you will notice a map of our upcoming events, one being Connect Mega in Salt Lake City. We hope you all are joining us this year. If you have any questions, please reach out to my colleague, Kristen Francis, Senior Director of Sales. I'll type in her email address. Anyone has any questions for her? All right. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Will Curran. As founder of Endless Events, Will Curran has been named one of the 40 Under 40 event industry leaders, 35 entrepreneurs under the age of 35, and Inc. magazine's coolest college startup, all before graduating college. Will has been producing events since high school when he started his first company and has now worked in production of large event clients, such as Emerald City Comic-Con, Anheuser-Busch, Color Run, Morton Salt, and Uber. His team's mission is to simplify the event planning process by creating the equation for events' perfect solution. They also relentlessly seek to be #1 in customer service in the events industry. From event logistics to business development to techno production, Curran has a diverse background in growing events and companies to the next level. Will, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you for having me, Camille, and I'm super duper excited to be here today. Before we jump in, the chat is absolutely exploding right now with everyone sharing where they're from. So I want to just give a shout to everyone who's attending right now. Brandy from Houston, Texas, Brenda from Ontario, Marquita from Denver, Michelle from Victoria, Ashley from Raleigh, literally all over the place. During the entire webinar, you'll be able to ask me questions. And just to prove I'll answer them, I asked in the chat to ask what size shoe I was, and Alexandra asked me what size shoe I was. I'm a 9.5, just so you know. But before we jump into AV, I think we want to do a poll just to get a baseline of where everyone's at, get some audience engagement, kind of a big deal these days when it comes to events. So should we kick off our first poll? So
yeah,
I'd love to know. Yeah, go ahead, Camille.
Yeah, if you notice, there is a question on your screen. How many times have you hired an AV company?
So we got a couple different options in here. So yeah, use that poll if you guys can. I'd love to get baseline, just how many times you've hired AV companies. Hoping quite a bit. They're starting to come in. Oh, looks like we got some pretty experienced planners, which is awesome. Fantastic. So you guys are going to get a lot out of this for sure. We're definitely going to try to avoid doing the basics then for you. But we do have some people who have only hired a couple times. We'll definitely make sure to give you some basics as well. We'll find that nice balance in there. Looks like we're getting some good results in. Awesome. We got about like 71% of the people submitted. So last 30%, you slackers, come back onto the Chrome window. Make sure that you vote in that poll. You're not going to want to tune away for this one. I wish you guys could see my webcam right now. I'm very energetic. I'm like, my hands are in the air. I'm kind of like dancing all around. right now, but you guys can just imagine a guy in a lime green shirt dancing around. All right. Here we go. All right, cool. Looks like we got a pretty, let's see, maybe give it like 10 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's bring up the poll results really quick. I think it's very, very interesting where we're at right now. So right now, how many times have you hired an AV company? It looks like 41% of you have hired 25 or more AV companies or done it 25 more times. And it looks like a pretty good split across all the other categories. So really good to know. I mean, definitely when it comes to hiring AV companies, practice makes perfect for sure, like anything. So hopefully I'm going to give you a couple tips to push you to that expert level to make sure that you're getting good pricing when it comes to your AV. All right, so let's go. I have one more poll for you guys. We do a lot of communication with our clients, and we're always wondering like what the biggest challenge is for planners and people in the industry is. So we want to know what do you find challenging when working with AV companies? Believe it or not, I actually run an AV company, so I would love to hear this. This is your chance to give that feedback for an AV company. What is the biggest pain point, challenge that you're seeing when it comes to AV companies? This is kind of not surprising, but also funny as well for me, so I'm excited to show you guys these results as they're coming in. So you have the choice between communication. Are they just not communicating right? Are they not explaining a topic correctly, explaining what the equipment is, all that sort of stuff? Is it just in-house AV and being restricted to using a very specific company and you don't really have a choice and that might lead to communication and pricing problems? Is it pricing? Do you feel like you're getting ripped off? Do you feel like you're not getting your value? Do you feel like you're paying too much money for what you're getting? Or is it something other? There's something also that is also really challenging when working at AV companies? I mean, maybe other is also maybe you don't have any challenges when working with AV companies and you're like smooth sailing. That would be fantastic, but I assume that's not why you're here today. So we're at like almost 80%. Kind of all the above, Michelle says. That's a really, really good point as well. So, yeah, maybe other will be all the above as well. So, yeah, you guys should be able to hear me. I hear you guys kind of coming through, and everyone can hear me all right. So maybe give me your favorite emoji in the chat if you're able to hear me okay. All right, so we're like 84%. I think this is a pretty landslide decision when it comes to what is the most challenging thing. So if I can get a drum roll from everyone grab your hands and slap them on your thighs real quick. Drum roll, please. The winner is pricing. I mean, kind of not obvious, right? We're talking about negotiating AV prices, and that's obviously the biggest challenge everyone's having. That's why you are here today. And so I will tell you right now, I see probably an even split around all my clients, but definitely it always feels like we are always talking to people, and they are talking about how pricing is a gigantic issue, and they wish that they were getting a better deal, or they don't understand what they're paying for, whatever it may be related to that. So I'm going to give you guys a bunch of like tips and tricks. This isn't like a formula like, hey, you have to do this exact thing. Some scenarios you'll need this, some scenarios you won't need this, but these are all just things to think of. My big thing is I love to play devil's advocate when it comes to AV companies, and that's why we created Endless, was kind of be the anti-AV company. So I'll kind of tell you a little bit of how we do things and how hopefully we decided to do this to make our clients' lives easier. And hopefully in the future makes your life easier too. I also hear Don saying unions are also tough. That's kind of like the in-house AV restrictions thing, right? Getting forced into a union. I can definitely talk about that. And throughout this entire time, just feel free to submit questions as they're coming in. I will answer questions about anything AV or event related. Just feel free to shoot in, or I'll even tell you my shoe size. So are you guys excited for finding out my tips and tricks to go into? So maybe in the chat, if you guys want to see my tips and tricks, maybe post a number 1 or an exclamation point or something like that in the chat if you're ready to see some tips. Yeah? Yeah, maybe? Some excitement? Maybe a clapping emoji? Silence? There might be a little bit of delay right now. So I'm going to jump right on into my tips for getting the best AV pricing. Oh my gosh, there's the explosion. Here we go. All right, here's the first one. Knowing what a quote looks like. A lot of you are doing this and have seen a lot of quotes, right? There was 30-40% of you had done 25 or more times hiring an AV quote or seeing an AV company, which means you've seen potentially a lot of quotes. One thing I recommend is understanding what they look like and knowing what's different. Have you ever seen those cartoons where it shows you one thing and then there's another thing and then it says spot the difference? Sometimes AV quotes are very much that way in a non-technical way. You have to kind of know what's where, what does this mean, what does this look like? And I'm going to show you the next tip, which helps support this one as well. But knowing what it looks like and knowing what is different about these quotes is extremely important. The reason why I say this is because a favorite story of mine is Brant Kruger talks about the story about how he had a client once who consistently would come up to him and say, you know, oh, blah, 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 can you make this announcement over the mic to be able to, you know, say X, Y, Z. The session is starting. You have 5 minutes to sit down, whatever it is. And in that story, she would always be so confused about how he would say, yeah, no problem, no problem. She's like, well, I just don't understand it. My other AV company would say no because they didn't have the voice of God box on their quote. And he said, well, wait, what's the voice of God box? And that's very, very interesting because there's no such thing as a voice of God box. It turns out this other AV company was making up this item and putting it on their quote when really to do the voice of God, all you need is a microphone. And pretty much all your AV quotes are going to have that. So it's important to know what they look like because far too often do we get thrown these random things. Things get thrown in there that you're like, what the heck is this? And you need to be able to say, hey, what is that? And you have to be able to question it. And that's where it goes kind of into the second piece, which I will talk about something that you can do actually to force that this happens the right way. So a lot of people are saying, who is the AV company that did that? They shall remain anonymous, actually. So, all right, I'm going to turn up my audio just a little bit. Sounds like you guys are having trouble hearing me. Is that a little bit better, everyone? If you guys can hear me a little bit better. All right. So here we go. When you go to third-party hotels are not willing to do this and say it belongs to their in-house AV. Oh, yikes, Liz. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can avoid that in the future. So talking about understanding what a quote looks like, this is really important. You know, don't be afraid. Look at the nitty-gritty as you're looking at your quotes, and don't be afraid to say, man, this looks weird. This looks different. Oh, my gosh. So, you know, definitely being able to do that. That's a simple one, right? So we talk a little bit about knowing what quotes look like, but sometimes you are just so overwhelmed by all the things on the quotes, right? What's a JBL VRX 932 LAP? What's a ETC Source 4 LECO 26 degree? Like all these things sound like Japanese to me sometimes and are super confusing. So what a really, really tactical tip is to ask for what I call a quote walkthrough. This is something that I like to say that we invented at Endless, but definitely something that we strive to do with every single one of our clients is have a chance to sit on a call with our clients, we screen share with them, and we walk you through every single line item in the quote. What is an ETC Source 4 LECO's 26 degree? Well, that's essentially a traditional theater light. It also is what is used to project gobos. You've probably heard of gobos before. There's those things that look like Batman signals projected on the walls. You know, all this stuff can be simply explained in a very, very simple and easy to understand manner. But the problem is a lot of times AV companies will just sit and hand you a quote and hope that you're so confused that you just say yes. This is obviously extremely dangerous because if you don't understand what you're paying for, how can you have the power to negotiate, right? It's like going into a car dealership and they say, all right, well, your engine's completely screwed and you need a completely new engine. It's going to be $10,000 new. And you're like, whoa, wait. If you understand cars a little bit, you might say, well, I don't think it's the engine. I think it's the spark plugs. That should be a $40 replacement. Boom, you have the ability to leverage and talk to. So when it comes to these quote walkthroughs, ask your company to walk you through the quotes. Super duper simple. But also this means, and what I've seen with a lot of clients is we offer this to every single one of our clients. A lot of times they say, no, I'm too busy, just send it to me. This obviously is not good as well. So you need to also make sure that you build in the time to be explained the quotes. As you start to build a relationship with a company and also understand the technical intricacies, like what things are on a quote, you won't have to do this as much. But to be honest, it's free education for them to tell you exactly what they're getting. But also, as they're explaining the quote, they have to explain what every line item is. So when you get to that voice of God box, when they're awkwardly trying to explain what it is and why you need it, and you find out maybe they're BSing you, you can call them on it. and you can say, hey, I don't want to have that there. Why do I need that there? Can't you just use a microphone? That sort of stuff. So ask for what's called a quote walkthrough. They should screen share with you, and they should literally show you what every single is. If you are still confused on what it is, there's videos on this stuff. There's pictures. They can show you everything. And the biggest thing that I can always tell my clients is that if it sounds confusing and they can't explain it in an easy to understand manner, if they say, oh, it's too complicated to explain, they are trying to confuse you. They are trying to take advantage of you. So always keep in mind, everything can be easily explained in layman's terms. All right, so hopefully that's helpful. This is pretty simple stuff so far. This is a big process of what we built into our company to make sure that our clients felt comfortable, but obviously it takes time. So a lot of you guys were asking about in-house restrictions. I saw unions are an issue with some of you guys. What happens when you want to bring an outside AV company and the hotel is going to charge you $7,000 for Wi-Fi? Oh my gosh, that's my newest pain in the butt thing these days. Oh, what's going to happen with these babysitting fees? Oh, I am forced to use this company. Or, oh, hey, if you go with this company, we'll give you food and beverage for free. We've seen it all. These restrictions that do not allow you to choose what vendors you want to use. So the first thing to keep in mind is that you can absolutely get rid of these restrictions. It is possible. You should have 100% freedom to use whatever AV company that you wish. There are some exceptions to this. And the biggest things are rigging. If you don't know what rigging is, it's essentially like hanging stuff from the ceilings. In some venues, it also has to do with stuff that's built from the ground up that goes high in the air, what we call like ground supported items. A lot of venues are requiring that you use their in-house company. This totally makes sense for one big reason, and that is safety. So the big thing is that you want to talk to them and say, hey, obviously I'm going to be required to use rigging. To be honest, even us as an AV company, we have stopped trying to negotiate this out. Instead, what we try to do is negotiate with them to get these prices lower, on which I can happily talk about some tactics when it comes to that. But everything else can be negotiated for sure. Power, what company you can bring in to do the projection screens, things like that. If you are using something like their in-house system, the lighting system, their sound system, or a screen built into the venue, you might be required to have someone there to operate it. They just do this to limit the ability for someone to damage something. It kind of makes sense, right? You wouldn't let someone come into your house and start, messing with your TV or, messing on your computer without you being there to supervise them, right? So when it comes to that sort of portion, you can sometimes just also look into, hey, is it cheaper for me to get it from the outside company? For example, if they're charging you $300 to use their in-house projector, well, chances are you can get a small screen and a projector probably for a little bit less. And to be honest, it's probably going to be a little bit more quality too because it hasn't been sitting in the venue forever. So Ingrid, you asked a great question. I will definitely answer that at the end about lumens and projectors. I just make sure that I get distracted very easily. I'm going to try to not go down that rabbit hole quite yet, but I'll definitely answer that at the end. So when it comes to these AV restrictions, know that you do have an option. You have 100% the option. The big tip when it comes to this is that the time to negotiate these restrictions to be removed is when? Is it after you've signed the contract? Is it when you're negotiating food and beverage? Is it when you're talking to the in-house AV company? Is it when you're thinking about the idea of your event? The time to remove these restrictions is in two parts. When you're doing your RFP process for your venues, you obviously look at multiple venues, right? You don't just pick one venue and say, this is the only one I'm going to choose. You always have backup options. So during the RFP process, but also Jenny got it correct, during contract. Michelle got it correct, during contracting process. So during the RFP, you want to give them a heads up. I'm going to remove these restrictions. Make sure part of your RFP is that these restrictions are gone. And then also in the contract, you've got to confirm that you have it. So this is really, really important. Far too often do I see with clients is they sign the venue contract, then they come to us and say, oh my gosh, I have these restrictions. They're going to charge me an arm and a leg. I have to use them. I'm required to do this. I have to use your unions. You got to negotiate it out when you're doing your signing. Otherwise, you're going to get really in a bad position because they don't have the contract. You have to do your venue there. Unless you're going to move venues, you don't really have a choice. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, how do I negotiate this out? Well, I made it really, really easy for you guys. I created a book on this. I'm not going to lie, legitimately a book on this. This URL on here, bit.ly/AV-restrictions, bit.ly/AV-restrictions. Type that into your browser. In fact, I'll throw it into the chat really, really quickly for you guys so you guys can grab it really, really quickly. AV restrictions. Boop. That guide right there, we wrote an ebook that not only explains what every single restriction they might put on you, things like babysitting fees, electrical fees. I've seen crazy things like, nothing really crazy anymore, it feels like to me, because I'm seeing it more and more, but things like the Wi-Fi, right? Like you have to use AV, otherwise I get to charge you $7,000 for Wi-Fi, right? Or we'll give you free Wi-Fi if you use us, right? And technically the Wi-Fi kind of sucks anyways. All those things like that are in there, but also there's contract language to paste into your RFP and contract language to put in your contract that says, look, I am going to use whatever vendor I want to use. You cannot restrict me in any sort of way. Literally there for you to copy and paste inside that book. So go ahead and go download and grab that. It is so helpful. It will make your life so much easier. So that we call that the How to Remove In-House AV Restrictions Guide. What's cool about that guide is you can take the word AV and replace it for things like Wi-Fi. We recently did a webinar also on how to remove Wi-Fi restrictions as well, because far too often venues are now the Wi-Fi is the new AV. They're realizing they can't make money off AV, but they can try to make money off of Wi-Fi. So happy to talk about that a little bit later as well. But go ahead and download that guide right now. Grab that language. It allows you to get that RFP and contract language really, really easily. And the same thing can be used, again, for Wi-Fi, catering, whatever restrictions you want to use, whatever type of events you're doing. So, yeah, definitely go check that out. Woo, that's one of my favorite things that I do with clients as well, is that I fight to get those restrictions removed. If you are using a third-party vendor and you haven't chosen your venue yet, get them involved in the process of choosing what venue you're going to choose. For example, I know what venues across the country are more restricted, which ones have unions, which ones don't have unions, everything like that. And my clients all the time come to me and say, hey, we're picking our venue for Austin next year. Where do you recommend we go? And we've been in so many different venues that we can help them pick. Or at minimum, at least be in on those conversations to make sure that their in-house restrictions get removed. And again, like you could love the in-house at some of these venues. There are cases where the in-house is actually good. Believe it or not, and you rarely ever hear a third-party vendor say that, but there is times when they are good. The important thing about this is that it gives you the freedom to choose. You are not forced into using any sort of vendor, which is all about. We want to have the freedom, right? So if you found that really, really helpful, give me like a 1 in the chat. I'd really love to know if that was really helpful for you guys. All right, here we go. Let's go on to the next one. The concept of apples to apples. How many people have heard of the term apples to apples before? And ironically, I put an orange on here because far too often it's apples to oranges. The idea behind apples to apples is that, wow, you guys found that really helpful. Awesome. Apples to apples is this idea that far too often when comparing quotes between two companies, quotes are looked at from apples to oranges. One company is providing this, another company is providing that. Or one company is providing 20 projectors, one company is providing 4 projectors. One company says to go to the lumens thing, I'm providing a 10,000 lumen projector, and one of them is providing 5,000 lumen projectors. Far too often are we getting in the point where we see it when we're working with our clients to help them figure out what vendor to choose, that quotes are too different to use. And a big negotiation tactic, this is kind of obvious, and I think all clients kind of do this already, is having multiple vendors look at it, right? The bidding process, or maybe just getting quotes or having a second quote to kind of look at what is different about this quote. You want to make sure that you do have this option. You don't have to do it all the time. My hope is that you find a great company, they give you great pricing, they're amazing to work with, and you can continue to work with them day in, day out, all day long. However, it is always good to compare other AV companies. And this is coming from a guy who runs an AV company, has to do this every single day, and you know, it's really important to do it. And the reason why I say is because the chance to compare quotes allows you to find out a lot of things. Quotes are kind of like the blueprint to how we're going to execute the AV at your event. It's what equipment I'm going to use. It's what labor I'm going to do. It's how I'm going to cover all my costs so I can be profitable. It's going to include thought processes behind your scheduling, behind what you're going to need to execute in every single room. You really want to make sure these quotes are accurate. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit later when it comes to finalized pricing. But when it comes to apples, absolutely make sure your quotes are apples to apples. And I'm going to say something a little controversial. Feel free to take it. Feel free to leave it. But something I highly recommend is don't be afraid to white label the quotes. Take all the pricing off of the quotes and share the quotes between the AV companies. Or if you have, for example, a trusted company that you like and you're like, I'm leaning towards this company, but they're more expensive, share the cheaper quote with the higher quote in company and say, why are you so much higher than these guys? And again, when it comes to explaining things simply, they should be able to simply explain why. And I will tell you, an ethical, awesome company to work with will admit when they can't beat a quote. This year, I have turned away so much business that I could not do because, honestly, they have great equipment. They're giving it to it for a better price. I don't know how they're doing it, or maybe they're trying to lose money off the first show so they can get more business, whatever it may be. But I have admitted when I cannot beat a quote, and I've turned business away. A good company will do that. If a company is willing to fight to get it to the cheapest, you got to sometimes question that too, you know? It's not necessarily unethical. So on my quotes, for example, that we have a confidentiality agreement that says you shouldn't share it with us, but I think it's totally fine to do it. I think as long as you're doing it in the right way. I think the unethical way to do this is to share the quote and then continue to share the quote after the other companies come back and gotten the price lower. For example, I've seen this a lot with PSAV. I shouldn't say names. With in-house AV company, I've seen it a lot where, for example, I will build a quote for a client, and after I know that the PSAV, the in-house company's quote is way higher, and I'm able to create an apples-to-apples comparison that says, here's exactly what they gave you, here's my price, look, I'm just cheaper because of the way our business model is built. And the worst thing to do is to then, that quote gets sent back to that company a third time. I'm not a big fan of giving fourth, fifth times to try to drop prices. I think if the first quote you can't provide isn't the right pricing, there's a completely different conversation needs to have rather than, hey, let's get this as low as possible. So Michelle asked, is there a reason why AV companies come in with higher rates and discount significantly when pushed? I don't share full quote, but I do share dollar values with other quotes. Again, you want to be careful because if you just share like, hey, they're at 20, you're at 30, you have to make sure the quotes are apples to apples. For example, if you came to me and said, hey, you're at 30, they're at 20, I would want to know what's on that quote so that I can give you an apples to apples comparison. But what you find usually is when that happens is when they recognize they have the potential to lose the business, they might discount it. Again, I think an ethical, good company knows what their value is and is willing to turn business away. I'll tell you right now, I win on price based on the fact that our model is just designed to be lower cost, but I don't give just discounts away to clients. I give discounts away when they're willing to do things like sign for multiple deals, that sort of stuff. Things where I can generally make, there's larger potential to get to it, but I won't just come back and be like, oh, okay, I'll discount it. Because isn't that kind of weird when all of a sudden you go to buy an apple and they say, hey, it's $1. And you say, well, I can get it for 50 cents over there. And they go, oh, actually, I'll do it for 45 cents. I mean, is that really the value of what the quote should be? Shouldn't they have been at 45 cents in the first place? So yeah, I see a lot of like the pitchforks are coming out for sure on this. This is a really hot topic when it comes to this sort of stuff, and it's a bit. You guys are not alone for sure when it comes to this. I think the important part is remove the pricing off the quote and allow them to see the equipment apples to apples. The reason why this is also important is because not all equipment is made the same. You might have noticed that, for example, one company will say, hey, I'm going to do your event, 2 screens on either side, a couple microphones, and some audio for the room, and they're at $10,000. Another company says the exact same thing, and it's $5,000. And you wonder, what's the difference in price? There is so much that can change when it comes to the quotes. For example, the lumens of projectors. Most common thing I see with clients is that other companies, to get their price lower, they will put less or more inferior equipment on their quote, so then that way they can get by getting the price down. But you don't want inferior equipment. If that room, if that size screen requires that equipment, so for example, if it needs a 10,000 lumens projector and they're putting a 5,000 lumen projector, the person who loses is not the AV company, it's you, the client, because you end up having a dimmer, less great looking screen. Man, and now you don't want that to happen. You want your screens to look great. So when you're comparing them apples to apples, you're making sure that the equipment matches up. And while it's not always possible to say, hey, this exact model, I want you to put the exact model on your quote, because not everyone has the same equipment. It depends on availability, all those things like that. They are able to put equivalents on there. And that's, again, going back to the quote walkthrough. When they quote walkthrough you through the quote, they can say things like, for example, like, well, that company said they were going to give you a Panasonic 10K projector. I'm going to give you a Sony 20,000 lumens projector. It's brighter, twice as bright. They can explain all those things to you, which is really, really fantastic. Yeah. So Michelle's asking about the Wi-Fi and the power and outside services and things like that. We can definitely talk about that for sure. So yeah, I think you guys kind of get the idea of this. There's a lot that goes into it. I can probably talk about apples to apples all day long, but that's probably the biggest mistake I see with planners is that they aren't comparing quotes apples to apples. And far too often they go with whoever's cheaper, not realizing that it's missing equipment, it's not as good equipment, things like that. Really quickly too, this is also very common I'm seeing pop up as well, is apples to apples comparison on labor as well. We are in an industry that has a very pretty standardized pay structure for engineers and technicians. If you see labor costs are dramatically lower than another company, that's a humongous red flag for you. You should be putting the warning signs, up like crazy, because we all pay technicians, qualified technicians, I should say, the same. Pretty much between every company, there's kind of a standard rate that all company guys want to be paid to work these events. So when you see a lower cost, you need to be asking why. Why is this lower? And there's a couple of ways it can be lower. One, they pay their guys way less, which I'll let you do the conclusion on why that might be happening and what will happen if they get paid less than the standard what another company is paying. But the other is also that they did their labor wrong. Sometimes labor is very ambiguous on quotes. It says things like, for example, oh, hey, it says things like day rate, or it says like 3 days times audio engineer, one of those. And you're like, well, my event's a day long. Why is it at 3 days? Like, again, a quote walkthrough would really help this because I can explain what goes into it. But a lot of times I see companies is they underbid their labor because labor is, as Sandy said, so expensive. It's like getting a car fixed. And I'm happy to explain why it's so expensive. But because it's so expensive and because it's so much lower, they might be underbidding it. And what that means is they might be giving you less labor than you actually need. So, for example, let's say your event is a day long. And let's say that you need what we call a half day, so a half day to set it up and a half day to tear it down. So that would be a half plus a whole plus a half, total of two. I'm horrible at math today. So what that makes sense is that essentially you're at 2 days rate. What some companies will do is they'll bill you they'll put on their quote 1 day of labor. And what this ends up happening is you get the dreaded after invoice. Has anyone gotten that before? Maybe a 1 in the chat. You got an invoice from your AV company that says, oh, all these things changed. Here's another invoice for what changed on site. Oh my gosh, probably the worst thing in the world, right? I'm going to talk about that in 3 slides when I talk about finalized pricing. But you want to make sure that their labor is accurate from the get-go. So great question from Ingrid. She asked about average labor for technicians. So obviously this depends on region of the country. I'm talking primarily United States. I saw a lot of Canadians in the chat, so I can only speak from an American viewpoint. I apologize. And it depends on region. It depends on what role they're playing. So for example, audio engineers compared to what's called a technical director are different. It also depends on the skill level of that person as well. But again, don't hold me accountable to these numbers 100%. And I think if there's any AV guys in here, they're going to hate me forever for sharing this stuff because it's kind of like the secret lore of AV. But usually you see anywhere from $25 an hour for a basic stagehand to come and push cases, help set up things, that sort of stuff. to about, for the guys that are sitting at the boards during your events and running it, $45 an hour, to the more higher level up guys who are managing the show calling the show, technically directing the show, $65 to $75 an hour. And then, that varies obviously as well. And that goes up and down. Usually I've seen also like as high as like $100 an hour in some places. And Holly had a good point. Know what the unions are in the cities, because union rates also cause things to skyrocket. I could probably do a whole presentation on unions, so I don't want to dive 100% into them, but it's important to know when your venues are union, just like it's important to know when they have restrictions as well. And if you do not want to have high labor costs and high AV costs, I will tell you right now, avoid union venues at all costs. I've only seen it in a very few cases where unions are easy to work with, that they do not do things like, for example, charge you to have one technician if you bring another technician in to shadow them. And usually what ends up happening is you get forced, if you want to save money, you only want to pay for one technician, right? Why pay for two and have one person shadow and do nothing all day long? You end up paying for one technician through the union, and then you're forced, again, that restriction into using that union labor. You don't want to have that happen. So make sure that you avoid that at all costs. And make sure that as a company is bidding on a quote as well, make sure they include those union costs, because you don't want to have a company saying they can do it for cheaper and it turns out they can do unions. So, oh my gosh, we love apples, don't we, guys? This has been super duper helpful. Let's see if there's any other questions. The reason why labor is so expensive, just so you know, is because the market dictates it. Engineers are paid those amounts, and therefore they can always go and work for another company if they wanted to. So you do have to retain good talent. Just like it costs a lot of money to have a great employee, they do get paid more. Also, keep in mind, these guys are setting up large structures that could potentially fall down on people, could hurt people. You do not want to skimp when it comes to these labor when it comes to it. You want to have really well-qualified people. Again, if you're doing small meetings like a screen in the corner and a projector and you need a guy just to kind of check in and make sure everything's okay, yes, don't be paying $100 an hour for labor for that sort of stuff. But if you are doing larger venues, make sure that you do appreciate the labor. And I have a whole webinar I've done on how to get more value from your AV companies. And one of the biggest things I can recommend is treat your guys like they're humans. They're a big part of what you do. Transportation costs, I'll answer that question really quickly for you, Sandy. I got a couple more slides to go, but I'm probably going to burn through them really quickly. Transportation costs, yes, that is normal. For example, our company's all across the country, so we actually fly all our guys in, so we actually make that part of it. But again, the company should explain what that looks like. Depending on what market you live into and what's going on, there can be some transportation costs. For example, last week we were producing San Diego Comic-Con. It is absolutely a nightmare to find parking. Normally you can park down by the convention center for free. However, during San Diego Comic-Con, everything's packed, so parking's $100 a day. So obviously, why would a guy work for $200 for a half day and have $100 taken out? They want to have their parking covers costs. So make sure that you that's in there. Just have a conversation about it, and the company would be happy to explain it. Good resource for finding third-party AV companies. I'm going to talk more about that at the end. I actually have a better resource for that as well. Doreen, you hit right on the head. Always offer food and beverage to all the techs. You will be blown away. You do small things for technicians, like make sure they have a food and beverage station during the entire event. They will work longer. They'll work harder, and they'll complain less. They'll be awesome to work with for sure. All right, I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to keep going through. I want to get to all your guys' questions. So next negotiation tactic I have is really simple. Whenever we're researching big purchases like cars and computers and all those things like that, we always Google the product and look it up and see what people are talking about it. I highly recommend, if you don't know what an item is on a quote, highlight it and Google it. You'd be surprised. There's YouTube videos that people explain what the product does. You get to see it in action, what it does, all those awesome things like that. Also, what's cool about it as well is you can sometimes get into the more technical side and see, for example, when did that product come out? And we're in a day and age with AV, it's moving so fast, right? It's like technology with computers. Every single month, there's a new cell phone coming out. AV equipment, every single day, there's new stuff coming out. So Google it, find out when that equipment came out, because the last thing you want to do is be getting old equipment as well. And the only way you'd find that out is if you Googled it. Highly recommend Googling it. It will also, sometimes you can visually recognize what an item is. And for example, if you didn't know what a moving head was, you can Google, the Platinum Spot 5R beam. You pull that up and you go, oh, okay, so that's what that is. And then when you get on site, you can see what it is and you can recognize, oh, hey, it's there. But that's also great because sometimes AV companies, the more unethical of them, will sometimes leave things out. They'll put things on the quote and say, I'm going to bring it, but they don't ever show it up. And if you know what something is and you don't see it on site, it gives you a good negotiation on site to say, where is that thing, right? So hopefully it doesn't ever have to get to that point. So Google things. All of our stuff's available online. We're our own industry in itself of AV, so there's a lot of information available on that stuff. All right. Next is to talk about payment terms. We talked a little bit about like discounting and things like that, and obviously we want to get the price down as low as possible. It's really important to talk about payment terms ahead of time. For example, if you are a big corporation and you know that you have to pay net 90 or net 60, right? It might be important to talk about those things before you sign the contract because, for example, when you look at the contract, they might charge you more for having these longer terms. However, I know a lot of clients are willing to pay 100% upfront. They already have their cash available for them. It's allocate part of the budget. And I will tell you right now, if a company came to me and said, hey, we're going to do this event with you. We need this to come down in cost by $4,000 to get this in budget. Instead of just saying that and then expecting the AV company to miraculously appear with $4,000 extra for you, you could say something like, hey, I can pay you 100% upfront for the event, and will you be willing to get $4,000 off? A lot of companies will take the cash flow to get it paid immediately and will give you a discount because of that. It's also important because, you have to know whether it's coming through the billing of the master account, everything like that. And we're going to talk about that as a second part in my next slide, but it's really, really important because when you're talking about payment terms, you want to solidify them up front. Like what happens when, for example, something changes on site? And that's where my next slide and the one I think that you guys are all kind of excited about is this idea of finalized pricing. We've all been there before. I mean, the reason why I created an AV company is because I actually produced my own events and I had to hire AV companies. So I wanted to do something better than what I had been experiencing as a client. So what always happened a lot of times when I was hiring these AV companies is that I would say, okay, this is what my needs are. This is everything, blah, 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 this and this and that. They'd send you a quote and you go, okay, this is good to go. And then afterwards you show up on site and it turns out they're forgetting a projector. They're forgetting a screen. They forgot to bill you the labor. Like, for example, we talked about the labor earlier. Oh, we forgot to bill you the labor for your full schedule. We didn't know. I always hear, well, we didn't know the event was going to go on extra hours. We didn't put any extra buffer for our overtime in there. We thought the schedule would go exactly as planned, right? I hear that one way too often. That's another big tip is make sure there's buffer when it comes to the labor because the last thing you want to do is be paying extra on labor because the event went a little bit over, right? So make sure they have buffer for overtime and extra time. But the biggest recommendation I have for a negotiation tactic to keep you getting screwed over with an extra invoice, everything like that, is to tell them, is this everything you need? And as long as I don't change anything on site, we can agree that my invoice will equal this quote. Far too often, I hear that that's not the case, right? It's I ordered this and I get hit with a bill afterwards. So tell your AV company, as long as I don't change anything on site, nothing should change on my invoice. This is really, really huge. It's a big promise I make at my company as well. As long as they've looked at the schedule, you've given them a full schedule, and you've confirmed 100 times this schedule is accurate to your labor, this is the actual equipment that you need to make this happen. As long as you've given them all the information, you've done a quote walkthrough, you feel 100% confident nothing should change, the invoice should not change afterwards. That's where asking things like buffer on your labor, things like, for example, making sure that all the equipment you need, making sure that you have an extra microphone or two, that sort of stuff is really, really important. And that's a huge tactic because a lot of times I see companies lose a lot of money because they are, and I apologize, hopefully the audio is getting a little bit better and it's not cutting in and out. I apologize, everyone. Lost my train of thought. Basically, just make sure that you are asking to make sure that it is exactly what you are getting. This is just far too common that I see people get huge invoices afterwards. And to be honest, you do not have negotiating power for those after invoices sometimes. The best thing you can say is like, I'm not going to pay this, well, then the company is just going to say, well, I'm going to send you a bill and send you to collections. No one wants to get into that place, right? An important tactic with this as well is if things do change on site. I think I saw this. Beyonce, is that how you say her name? She asked, is a verbal agreement suffice? Would you need anything in writing? We do verbals and we talk with our clients, and then what we do is we come back with them and say, hey, here is our here's what it's going to cost to do that extra overtime, to change them, move that setup from one room to the other, or to add that projector, and we make sure that you see the price before you agree to it. We don't ever say, hey, we'll send you an invoice afterwards, you'll figure it out, right? We don't want that to ever happen. So I highly recommend start with a verbal, have them come back with a quote to give you the price change on it, or be able to give you a rough quote verbally to at least start with. I hope you guys. I see here some people saying they lost sound and audio. I hope it's gotten better for you guys. So I hopefully won't say anything too profound in the next 5 minutes for you guys. All right. All right, so here we go. Some quick questions related to this. What do you mean by buffer on your labor? Labor obviously is based on a schedule, right? So if, for example, if your event is exactly 10 hours of work that needs to be done, we normally are able to say, okay, it's going to be 10 hours of work. We're going to budget 10 hours in our quote for this. However, we all know that if an event's 10 hours, it usually means probably about 12 hours, right? You end up staying a little bit later because the CEO blabbered on a little too late, or you have to come in a little earlier than expected. There's always like those little small nuances, as we know as event planners, you have to kind of roll with the punches. So I highly recommend is that you ask your AV company, hey, does this include a little bit of buffer of overtime, whatever it is, just in case we go a little bit over? And this is always really important because it always happens. I don't know any clients that always stay exactly on schedule. We always have to come in a little earlier than expected, or we end up having to stay a little bit later, or maybe something took a little bit longer than expected, whatever it is, or, hey, rehearsals went a little bit longer. Just always include that buffer in there. And feel free to negotiate. Say, like, hey, include that buffer, and then I want to see a finalized bill afterwards, and then maybe there's some bill backs. Maybe you get some money back. That'd be fantastic. So great question, Liz. Michelle asks, do all outside AV companies bring extra equipment in case something breaks down? It's one of your concerns when not using it in-house. Oh, my gosh, I hear that all the time. It is really, really common that people wonder, like, hey, how's that work? All out-of-house companies like myself, for example, always usually bring backups of the stuff that we need, or we make sure that we at least are billing for it. For example, I highly recommend having backups of projectors, especially if they're rigged and hung in the ceiling. Make sure there's another projector up there hung to them, and I can talk more about that a little bit later. But definitely make sure that there's backups for really mission critical stuff. That should be included in the quote. Talk about that for sure. However, there is some sort of, Murphy's Law that happens in the AV industry. Something's going to go wrong, right? I will tell you right now, a good out-of-house AV company can get you replacement equipment extremely quickly. An example, 2 weeks ago, I had a client. They came in, and we were working with their, they were doing a hologram, kind of like the Tupac hologram, and it wasn't through us. And they brought this other company in, and this other company didn't quite know exactly what they were doing. They ended up saying, we need more drape. We need drape to cover this back up. Obviously, the hologram company wasn't able to, so they looked to us and say, hey, can you get this for us? Can you get this extra drape that we need? I can tell you, we made that call, and before they got done with rehearsals, we had the drape already on the stage and up in there. And the way we do that is through fast supply chain. That's more me talking about Endless and kind of what we do, but it is possible for outside companies. And ask them that question too. What's your backup plan? How are you going to get equipment here? Tell me, what's your response time? What does that look like? Do you bring backup equipment? All those sort of things. Super duper helpful. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. All right. Cool. There's a lot of questions. I want to make sure that I finish up on time, so I'm going to keep going, and then we'll do 10 minutes of question and answer. I'm almost done. All right. Next thing is revisions. A lot of times we talk about finalizing price. You're signing on that quote saying, this is exactly what I need, blah, blah, blah. The important part is every time there's a revision, I need to add another projector. Hey, we added another room. Hey, we're getting later. All the things that happen pre-event that are changing, always make sure you're getting an updated quote. Please, please, please. I see far too often people just say, oh, yeah, please add that. And then the salesperson replies and says, oh, yeah, I added that in there. Oh, yeah, you're good. And you never get to see that quote. And then sometimes this can happen where there's a lot of changes happening really, really quickly. And I've seen clients where they make a lot of changes. They don't realize how expensive these changes are going to be. So we send them a quote after they made 5 changes all at once. We say, here you go. And they go, oh, my gosh, why did this go up so much in budget? We do another quote walkthrough. We explain, this is what changed, this is what changed, this is what changed, this is what changed. And they go, oh, well, these were more nice to haves. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Absolutely make sure whenever you're doing revisions, do another quote walkthrough. Have them hop on the call. Explain what changed. Make sure you're getting a quote. Make sure that when you are leading up to the day of your event, you have seen the most latest quote and where your pricing is going to be. And that's what you should solidify with that finalized pricing. Do not rely just on saying, yeah, okay, oh, yeah, okay. Because believe it or not, as you guys know, AV is expensive. Changes in schedule can be expensive for labor. Changes in equipment can be expensive. All those sort of things. So definitely make sure that you are doing that. All right. So I had a lot of really, really nitty gritty questions about how to negotiate certain things, how to, I forget what all the questions are. We'll probably get them in the questions, but just so you guys know, let's see if I can get to this. It doesn't show up on my screen, but I assume you guys can see it right now. I actually created an online course that is designed to teach you to negotiate and to get more from AV companies. It's literally called the How to Hire an AV Company course. I created it as my inside chance to share all my secrets I've learned from my perspective of how to get more value out of an AV company. So if you just go to the courses.helloendless.com, so I'm going to post that link in the chat too as well. Yeah. Camille's helping me out. So courses.helloendless.com. It might be a typo on it. If it says course without S, it might be because I'm horrible at spelling, and I made these slides at 10 o'clock at night. So it's courses.helloendless.com. I created a course where you can learn from the AV's perspective how to get more value. What are the sort of questions you should be asking in your first meeting? What sort of questions should be you negotiating? This is actually, a lot of this comes from the course. If you found a lot of value in this webinar, that course is literally that time for the entire process. How do you deal with them on site? How do you get, all these sort of things are built into this course for you guys. And it's my insider secrets to getting more value from an AV company. It's literally, I've done events for over 10 years, literally all my secrets from the AV perspective. So definitely hope you guys found a lot of value in that. Definitely check it out again. It's courses, COURSES.hello, endless, HELLO, endless, ENDLESS.com. I think right now we're running a special, Holly. She asked how much does it cost. To be honest, I have an awesome education manager named Sarah who is in charge of it, and I think she's running a special on it as well. So definitely go check it out. But I can tell you right now, it's for like a credit course, it's very, very low on there as well. And to be honest, if you don't end up making your money back from what you save and what you've learned, let me know and I'll give you a refund. Definitely, it's one of those things that you're going to easily be able to save a little bit of money. I hope that in this process, you're going to save at least the cost of your time that you spent here in negotiating. So definitely go check it out for sure. But it's literally a ton of tips. It's this times a couple hours of education. So, all right. Really quickly, you should be able to see all my contact information on the slideshow right now. Take a picture of this. I believe we are doing downloadable PDFs afterwards as well, guys. But I'm available for any questions at all. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. We do a podcast every week called Event Icons, where we interview the icons of the industry. I'm really readily available. If you need anything at all to help make sure that you guys are not getting screwed in the negotiation process. So don't hesitate to give me a call, a text, an email. If you need anything at all, I'm really, really readily available. I'm all about helping the industry and making sure that planners are more educated in this process. So definitely make sure that you give me a shout out. But I believe Camille has a gazillion questions ready for me. So I'm going to do a speed round of trying to look into answering all your questions.
Yes. I don't think this was addressed, but someone said, can you address electric and AV in terms of how much power is needed for a simple system, and when would you need to engage supplemental power drops from the hotel?
Great question. Your AV company should be able to tell you exactly how much power you're going to need for the process. I highly recommend make your AV company get the cost of it and negotiate it for you. A lot of times when cost is so high, I just go, for lack of a better term, punch the hotel in the face and say, no, you're not going to charge a client $5,000 for electrical. I did an event across the street a week ago. It was $2,000. Please give them a bill for $2,000. We are in the unfortunate stage where electrical is one of those things hotels are making money off of. They shouldn't, in my opinion. But at that point, like, you kind of have to wonder, okay, they're just a business too. What are we going to try to do to help them out? So I highly recommend have your AV company, though, tell them exactly how much power they need versus it being done on site, which is the worst thing that could happen. Or, hey, yeah, I'm just going to need 200 amps of power. Most of the time you're going to be like, what do I need? Also, where's the power going to be placed? A lot of these things your AV company should talk to them about. I really appreciate that question, Marianne. And I've done a couple webinars where I talk a little bit further about it as well. So if you go check out helloendless.com, we have a resource page where we talk about that a little bit more. I'll post that resource link in the page as well, so you guys can check that out.
There's another question. I don't think you answered it. Someone said, is there a company that has rewards program, like how can you make 2-year out of deals with hotel brands, et cetera? I'm not sure if he answered that.
Oh, so like how is the question, like how can you essentially how do you figure out things like multi-year contracts essentially with the in-house AV company?
I think that's what Alexis is asking, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the best thing to do is if you are planning, so if you're talking an out-of-house AV company, ask them if they are nationwide. Do they have locations other places? And I highly recommend, if you think this company is great, definitely feel free to put a contingency clause in there too, so you're protected. I'm a fan of just doing verbals where I say, hey, if we do a really good job, will you come back to us again and I don't have to bid for this? But if they are nationwide, they can serve you in multiple markets. If you're in the same city over year after year or venue after venue, definitely make sure that you talk about multi-year contracts with them. I'm a big fan. This is my company's kind of perspective, is that I tell my sales team and me and everyone I talk to, I say, hey, if you're unhappy with our service, I don't want you to have to continue working with me. Obviously, there was some sort of mismatch. We screwed up, whatever it is. I'm never going to force you into a multi-year contract if you're unhappy. A lot of my clients that I do multiple events year after year after year are literally just based on the fact that they're so happy they want to continue to work with me. So I would highly recommend that you talk definitely about it, but don't be afraid to say, hey, I need some sort of contingency clause if it's the first time working with them. Hey, I don't want to be screwed into a multi-year contract with a company I'm unhappy with. Can we just make this contingent on the fact that I'm happy? And they should be willing to do that. And yeah, Melissa just asked, by the way, the course, yes, is available online, just so you guys know. Try to fit in as many questions as possible. All right, Camille, what's the next one?
Kelsey just asked, what are reasonable costs for Wi-Fi in meeting space? I feel like we've been charged absurd amounts, but there's no negotiating power because the hotel requires them to use them as suppliers. Can AV companies help us negotiate that?
Yeah, so they can. Most are not doing it, though, but we're starting to realize how important it is to do it. I did a webinar on our website. It's called I think it's called how to make your event Wi-Fi better, and essentially it's how to negotiate your Wi-Fi so you can use out-of-house companies. Wi-Fi is like where AV companies were 6 years ago, where everyone thought you had to use the in-house company. It's the only choice that you had. You get worse results. You get forced into these horrible, basically what you asked, Kelsey, and that happens all the time. However, people have to be, just so you guys are aware, you can bring outside Wi-Fi companies in that can sometimes be cheaper, or at least play leverage in getting the in-house company cheaper. We talk a lot about that in our webinar, and let me see if I can post a link to that in the chat. It is right here. It's posted in chat. It's offers.helloendless.com/event-y-fi-webinar. But in the chat, there's that link. We do a whole webinar where an hour we talk with Wi-Fi experts, with event app companies. How can you make sure that you're getting the right Wi-Fi, exactly what you need, what do the speeds mean, all those sort of things like that are all explained in that webinar. So I highly recommend signing up for that as well. But the important thing to keep in mind is just like AV, it can be negotiated, the exclusivity out, and always keep that in mind. Thank you, Kelsey.
Time for a few more questions. I don't think you answered this one. Derek said, what happens if you order an extra microphone or LCD projector and you don't need it? Is a credit possible for not using it?
Oh, that's such a good question, Derek. So I will tell you right now that obviously there's an opportunity cost with us bringing equipment out onto site, and we have to pull it from the warehouse. If I can be told before I load the truck, which is usually 24 hours before load-in, the setup, I can get it removed. However, if it's on site, there's not a lot I can do. And to be honest, that's where the quote walkthrough is definitely really helpful. They should be walking through every room. Okay, we're in La Sala A. You need a projector, 8-foot roll-up screen, and speakers. Does that sound right? And they should, hopefully at that point, you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I need. Obviously mistakes are made. I think if you have a good relationship with your AV company and they're spending a lot of money with you, you're spending a lot of money with them, and you generally have a good relationship, it hasn't been hostile. If you came to me and said, hey, Will, that projector and screen, that one extra projector and screen, can we get that removed off? I would probably be like, yeah, I'll take care of it. My business and keeping you happy is more important to that. However, if you forgot that there were 8 projectors and they all need to go back, it's going to be a little bit harder for me to justify taking, $2,000, $3,000 off your quote. And hopefully that's helpful. But there is that kind of opportunity cost. Once it's there on site, it could have made it on another event. I might have had to rent another projector for someone else, which then cost me more money. So, yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. So, great question.
Okay, we have our last question, which I don't think you answered, from Marianne. Can you address electrical needs for events, when you might need to go from wall in the bathroom electric to drop-in electric and incurring additional labor costs at the hotel?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Marianne. Yeah, definitely when do you need more power? Again, your AV company will tell you this, but for simple things like 2 speakers and a projector, wall power all day long. When you're starting to hang things on the ceiling, absolutely you're probably going to need more power at that point because you're probably spending enough money, you're going to have a lot of electrical needs. If you're using what we call conventional lights, so this is a good negotiation tactic as well, is ask your AV company, are you using conventional lights versus everyone has LED lights. You're used to having LED lights in your house, right? They're less powerful, they're less power consumption. A lot of times that can draw power down, but if you're bringing in conventional, old school light bulbs, you're going to need more power. So that's something to keep in mind. A lot of times, to be honest though, the AV company, without even doing some quick math, will tell you immediately, hey, is this something where I need a lot of power or not? And again, I know a lot of this has been talking about banking on the fact that these companies are ethical, they're good to work with, but if they are not giving you this information, you're getting a lot of good clues into who you should be working with, right? So my biggest recommendation, ask the AV company, do I need additional power for this room? Do I need, this and this and that? And they'll tell you exactly what you need. But most of the time, bigger setups, general sessions, things like that, typically do need more than just the wall power, unless you're just doing some simple projectors and a couple of screens, maybe less than 300 people or so. Usually you're not having to worry about it. But things like, for example, if you want to do a hair drying demo on stage, all of a sudden you're plugging in hair dryers and microwaves, you might need a little bit more power. So that's something just to kind of keep in mind.
I think that wraps
kind of answer it?
Yeah, I think that wraps up all our questions we have, and you answered a lot throughout the presentation, so thank you for doing that, Will. And thank you again for sharing with us. After this webinar concludes, you will be directed to a short survey. If you could fill that out, that would be great for us to get some feedback on future webinars. You can learn more about our past and upcoming webinars on all our websites listed on your screen now. For those of you watching live today, you will receive an email with your certificate of attendance for this session tomorrow evening. Again, if you're watching on demand, please email me your certificate. Please email me for your certificate. It will not come to you automatically. If you have any questions, please email me at cmore@connectmeetings.com. And we'll hope you'll join us again in August when we have another informative session on interpreting body language with Connect speaker Tracy Brown. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.